Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is July 11th, 2022, Monday, July 11th, 2022. And our first story is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories. All right. This is just a short story, really having to do with the forgotten crimes of the Old West. And starts off echoes of the past, especially a violent one, is heard sometimes years afterward. Such was the case in September of 1923 when human bones were found about a mile and a half from Whitewater, Colorado. The coroner and sheriff concluded that they'd been buried for many years, and they suspected they belonged to a man killed during a brawl at a saloon close to the discovery of the remains. W. H. Kaufman, a local resident of the area since 1883, told a story of what happened to the unfortunate victim. Around 1881, at that spot, was a saloon and blacksmith shop. In 1883, there was a fight, and two men were killed, and Mr. Kaufman remembers that one of them was buried nearby. Without money and perhaps an identity, the man was buried without a coffin or not even in consecrated grounds. The years passed and the weather eroded the area, uncovering the bones and scattering them along the roadside. After a little digging, the rest of the skeleton was found. The plans were to rebury them. Fast forward to 1870. Roadside inns and taverns not only welcomed travelers, but also stories of skullduggery and secret burials. In 1870, Mr. Kennedy ran a tavern at the junction of the Mora and Taos Road in New Mexico. One night, a gunshot sounded out, and Jose Cortez's eyes sprung open, but lucky for him, before he could make a sound, he saw the landlord standing over the body of another traveler staying in the same room. By the light of the lamp, he saw blood pour from the bullet hole in the man's head into his red whiskers. The landlord left, and Jose took the opportunity to escape from the inn. A year later, he told police of what he witnessed. A search was made, and sure enough, a skeleton was found, and Mr. Kennedy was arrested for murder. The townspeople held an impromptu trial, but failed to agree. So another trial was scheduled. However, a band of armed men thought that one trial was enough and forced the sheriff to turn over the prisoner. They hung him from the rafters of an old slaughterhouse. And sometimes it's hard for us to believe that things like this took place, but it did, even for the burial, because even back then, as inexpensive as a burial was, it cost money. And if you were nobody and didn't mean anything to anybody, it was they were going to dig a hole and put you in the ground, and that was the end of that. So yeah. And then we're going off to New York Post. This is titled "Mysterious 19th Century Vampire Slaying Kit Sells for $15,000 at Auction." A vampire slaying kit from the 19th century has sold at auction for $15,517. The kit, which was sold on June 30th in an auction facilitated by UK-based Hanson's auctioneers, was originally estimated to be worth between $2,387 and $3,581. Inside the kit were crucifixes, a pair of matching pistols, a brass powder flask, holy water, a Gothic Bible, a wooden mallet, a stake, brass candlesticks, rosary beads, and police paperwork from the time, according to a press release from Hanson's. The items were enclosed in a box with two brass crucifixes on the lids, which are part of the box's locking mechanism. The press release said, "The kit originally belonged to a man named Lord William Malcolm Haley, a former administrator of British India, according to Charles Hanson, the owner of the Hanson's auctioneers. Whether through fear or fascination, it's interesting to know a member of the highest aristocratic social order, a man with a place in the House of Lords, acquired the item," Hanson said in the press release. "It reminds us that the vampire myth affect people from all walks of life." The items in the kit are stamped with Lord Haley's initials, the press release said. Belief in vampires, an undead creature said to need human blood to survive, goes back hundreds of years and persists in some parts of the world today, Hanson said. They are enshrined in European folklore. The task of killing a vampire was extremely serious, and historical accounts suggest the need for particular methods and tools, Hanson added. Items of religious significance such as crucifixes and Bibles were said to repel these monsters, hence their presence in the kit. Hansen said the vampire slaying kit gained interest from all over the world ahead of its June 30th auction. Bids came in from across the globe, including France, America, and Canada. And the news story about the find went viral, Hansen said. It made headlines galore as far afield as Australia and America. Objects like this fascinate both collectors and people in general, and this vampire kit has particularly interesting provenance. In the end, the vampire slaying kit went to an unnamed private buyer from the UK, according to the press release. You know what? But they failed to basically disclose why Lord Haley. One thing is to believe or fear, if that's what you want to call it, vampires. But what made Lord Haley actually put together a vampire kit? Like, what did he know or what did he see? I mean, this guy was taking this seriously, and I'm not surprised though that it sold for 5 times what they originally estimated that it was going to go to. I'm not surprised at all. And I bet you whoever took it, probably it's a good investment because I have a feeling that that is going to go up in price as time goes by. Okay, our next story is out of Eerie News. This is one of our articles, and this is something that has to do a lot of people don't remember that just a couple of days ago was the anniversary of the Roswell Incident. 75 years ago, a New Mexico rancher gave a report to the local sheriff, which was quite unique. It was something about finding metallic debris on a ranch about 80 miles from Roswell, New Mexico. W. Mac Brazel never imagined what would come of that report. He was a foreman of the J.B. Foster sheep ranch, and for a couple of weeks he'd been coming across strange metal debris. Without a telephone or radio, he was unaware of a slew of UFO reports from across the country. On July 5th, he visited the town of Corona and heard of the so-called flying saucers. Brazel no doubt wondered if what he'd found on the ranch was somehow connected to the sighting, and he contacted the Chaves County Sheriff on July 7th about what he had found. A little over a week before, Kenneth Arnold, an amateur pilot, described seeing unusual flying objects over Mount Rainier, Washington, that was reported in different newspapers. Quote, but Wednesday, a Boise, Idaho pilot, Kenneth Arnold, reported he saw 9 bright saucer-like objects streaking through the air about 10,000 feet high between Mount Rainier and Mount Adams. That was a portion of a small article that appeared on the Seattle Star, of course, which was that area where Kenneth Arnold had that sighting of the UFOs. The sheriff contacted the military, and on July 8, 1947, the public information officer at the base issued a statement that the U.S. Army Air Force had found a flying disc at the Foster Ranch. There was a retraction soon after, but that genie could never be put back in its bottle. The debris was taken to Fort Worth Army Airfield in Texas, where experts said it was a crashed weather balloon. But before this announcement could be issued, the New Mexico base had put out their version, which called it a flying saucer. Lieutenant Hott, Roswell's public information officer, said the commander, Colonel Blanchard, ordered him to use that description. Orwell had coined the term Cold War 2 years before, along with the end of World War II. The war was over, but the fear of invasion was still present, which is perhaps why the public was quick to accept that further reports of flying saucers and bright objects from across the country were just rockets or jets being tested by the military. The stories faded from the headlines. Eventually, the Roswell incident would be considered the jumping-off point for ufology and myriad stories and movies about men from outer space and alien science fiction. Almost 5 years after the Roswell incident, UFOs were seen over Washington, D.C. Reports came from airline pilots that described flashes of light streaking across the sky. Air Force jets were scrambled, but they found nothing. Fast forward to 1978, when the National Enquirer picked up the story about what happened that summer day in New Mexico. Only the year before, the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind had been released, and witnesses who stayed quiet back in 1947 stepped forward to tell of a spacecraft and alien bodies, which only meant one thing: the government had covered it up. The CIA and military's excuse for the cover-up were concerns that it was new technology used by the USSR and not something from outer space. In 1994, the Air Force issued a 1,000-page report explaining that what was recovered at Roswell was a high-altitude balloon, part of Project Mogul, which was used by the military to intercept Soviet radio transmissions. Eventually, they would fall to Earth after deflating. In 1997, Hubcorn now owned the ranch where the famous Roswell crash took place. He charged tourists $15 to take a look at the landscape and let the viewer fill in the details from their imagination as to what once lay among the red desert rocks. An all-night rave dance party was scheduled for the anniversary of the Roswell Incident at the Corn Ranch. By then, rumors circulated that Brazil was coerced by the government to keep the government secret, not only of the downed craft, but that there had been a recovery of 3 to 5 alien bodies which were taken to the Area 51 military base in Nevada. Many of those who participated or were witnesses to what occurred in the New Mexico desert in 1947 are now gone, and Roswell's place on the ufology map would not be forgotten again. So there you go. I mean, and this is a very concise article. There's a lot more that goes to that story, especially what happened to Mac Brazel and the aftermath of making that report. I'm planning to do an article on that, but it's very interesting. It wasn't by any means like, I made a sighting and then they left me alone. It seems that there was some truth that later on that he was coerced, or almost from what I've read, it's what I've investigated. It's almost like he wished he'd never gone ahead and done that report, because it was a problem for him later on. Okay, the next article is out of Michigan Live, and this one's titled "Alligator Hunt Continues in Kalamazoo River near Michigan College." The search for an alligator in the Kalamazoo River continues, though Albion's College Nature Center, which first reported the sighting of the reptile, is ready to reopen with posted warnings. Officials have yet to confirm a location of the alligator. Albion College spokeswoman Kathy Cole said, "The college's White House Nature Support Center reported 2 independent, credible sightings of what appeared to be a 4-foot or 5-foot alligator in the same general area where the river runs through the Nature Center. The college is working with a local Department of Natural Resource officer," Cole said, "as well as the Critchlow Alligator Sanctuary in Athens, Michigan, to find the alligator." A spokesman for the statewide DNR office has had no update on the search. The college's public safety division is also assisting in the search efforts. There is no state law governing the animal control of alligators, though state law does indicate that a law enforcement officer must assume the role of an animal control officer with large carnivores. The initial alligator sightings prompted the college to close the White House Nature Center Sunday and Monday, July 10th and 11th. The Nature Center, just outside Southeast Albion, will reopen on Tuesday, July 12th, with signs urging visitors to exercise an abundance of caution. You know what? I think that is so unusual, because you never think of people in Michigan having to deal with alligators. This is something like only from like Florida or maybe Louisiana, places with swamps and hot weather. There you go. So this is another story out of also out of Eerie News, and this one is titled "The Wreck of the SS SAPONA and the Devil's Triangle." Over 100 years after it was commissioned as a warship, what's left of the SAPONA sits on the edge of the Bermuda Triangle, a silent witness to many eerie occurrences. The SS SAPONA, originally named the Old North State, then changed, was one of 4 ships manufactured for use in World War I by the United States. Their names were SAPONA, Cape Fear, Faith, and the Americas. There was a steel shortage, and they were made of concrete by the Emergency Fleet Corporation at Wilmington. However, the war ended before they could be used as troop transport ships. The SAPONA launched October 15, 1919. She made her maiden voyage between Wilmington and Jacksonville, Florida. By January 1920, it was being used to transport phosphate rock from Florida to Baltimore. Then she was used in New England, and the New England coal traded as part of the United States Reserve Fleet. In 1923, Carl G. Fisher purchased the freighter with plans to convert it into an annex at Caesars Creek for the Coco Lobo K Club, as a clubhouse for the Miami members of the American Legion. The SAPONA arrived in Miami Beach in November of that year. However, within 50 feet of the docks, she grounded in shallow water. Captain C.B. Hughes had commanded on the ship down from Norfolk with a crew of 5 men. The plans were to renovate her and take her to the Cay and moor her to a reef. However, the Sampona's destiny was never to end where she was planned to go. During the hurricane season of 1924, residents of Fisher Island took refuge inside the ship. In February 1925, she was sold to R.P. Clark, which had plans to use the ship as an oil warehouse. Fisher had never used her at Coco Lobo Cay, and she had lain derelict on Virginia Key until Clark purchased it. That same year, a paving company bought the bayfront property where the Sampona was kept, so it had to be moved. While at dockside, she developed a severe list and was considered an eyesore. This led to the sale of the ship to a Nassau liquor merchant and member of a prominent Bahamian family, Bruce Bethel, for $2,000. He was described as a quiet, retired British officer who attended church regularly. He lost his right arm during the war in France. However, this did not stop him from welcoming smugglers to store their liquors in his padlocked warehouses. He became known as Bethel of Bimini. Among the several hundred British subjects living on the island, his prestige rivaled those of local government officials. The newspapers described the transaction as, quote, once the pride of America's wartime follies, the concrete ship Sampona today dropped a shuddering anchor into the white coral rock of Gun Cay to become the mothership for all South Florida rum runners, end quote. Bethel's plans was to use the ship as a floating warehouse for liquor. Prior to the Volstead Act of 1919, Bethel ran a liquor store with his brother Charles Bethel in Nassau. He recognized the opportunity that Prohibition brought to anyone supplying liquor to the U.S., and Bimini was about 50 miles away from Miami. A case of liquor purchased for $18 could be sold as high as $100 in Florida. Then, on September 18, 1926, what became known as the Great Miami Hurricane of 1926, also known as the Great Bahamas Hurricane of 1926, devastated the area along with the Bahamas and the U.S. Gulf Coast. Its intensity was equivalent to a Category 4 hurricane, and 145-mile-per-hour wind swept everything in its path. Due to the effects of the hurricane, the price of rum skyrocketed. Liquor was such a premium that after the hurricane, everyone in Miami Beach tried to salvage any intact bottles laying at the bottom of Biscayne Bay. On September 30th, 13 men, including a Miami policeman, were captured by Coast Guard and put in jail for diving after the whiskey and bringing it to the surface bottle by bottle. The parlance of the day was to call the liquor cargoes of merchandise. A story by the Chicago Tribune described it thus. Curiously enough, the beer hasn't jumped in price. It has always been $1 a bottle, and it remains $1 a bottle. But perhaps there is a reason for that. The beer has always been dropped over the sides of liners, brought ashore, bagged and distributed from substations or bases of supply, and the storm did not affect the situation much. It was the rum fleet that was demolished and set to the bottom all the way across the Bay of Biscayne, the Gulfstream and the Atlantic, between Miami and other southern points, and Gun Cay, Bimini, and Nassau on the Bahama Islands. Local rum runners estimate that between 1 million to 3 million in rum cargoes went to the bottom in the West Indian Hurricane. Gun Cay was a notorious rum row, and normally 10 ships ran liquor to the coast. Only one of Bethel's ships survived the devastation. This was a Sampona. She suffered a hole through the hull and wound up grounded off South Bimini, but at least she wasn't 5 fathoms deep like the rest of his fleet. One of Bethel's other boats, the Queen of Rum Row, a 3-masted schooner, went to the bottom of Gun Cay Inlet. Bethel still had plans to convert the Sampona into an entertainment ship that included a thick dance floor of glass over a shark aquarium, but his idea was never realized. Rum running, or bootlegging as it was known, was a lucrative but very dangerous business, as told by a story appearing at themobmuseum.org. One of the leading rum runners in South Florida at that time was James Horace Alderman, known as the Gulfstream Pirate. On August 7, 1926, Alderman and an associate, Robert Weech, were heading back to Miami with a load of booze they picked up in Bimini. A Coast Guard vessel with 7 crewmen and a Secret Service agent aboard came upon Alderman and shot across his bow, ordering the rum runner to stop. The Coast Guard boarded Alderman's vessel and brought him, Weech, and the liquor back aboard the Coast Guard vessel. What happened next is unclear. The Coast Guard asserted that Alderman smuggled a gun on board the Coast Guard vessel and started shooting. When another Coast Guard vessel came upon the scene, they found that Secret Service agent Robert Webster and boatswain Sidney C. Sanderlin were dead. A motor machinist, Victor A. Lambie, was injured and later died from the injuries. Seaman Second Class Jody L. Hollingsworth was shot in the eye, but he survived. Alderman was put on trial in January of 1928. He was convicted of 3 counts of murder as well as piracy. Alderman was set to be executed at Coast Guard Base 6, now site of the Bahia Mar Marina on Seabreeze Boulevard in Fort Lauderdale, in secret. However, a local reporter snuck in disguised as an undertaker's assistant. When the bottom dropped in the makeshift gallows and Alderman dropped into the noose, the reporter later wrote how Alderman's neck didn't break. Instead, he struggled for 12 minutes before finally dying. On August 7, 1929, at 6:19 a.m., James Horace Alderman became the only person ever hanged by the U.S. Coast Guard. By 1928, Bethel estimated he sold more than $3 million worth of liquor at island prices. Eventually, Bimini faded as a smuggler's paradise, but Bethel's adventures with the SAPONA had not ended. In July of 1933, he was on board the ship when a companion was seized with cramps while swimming. He attempted to save their life and was swept into the Gulfstream and then out to sea. With one arm, he hung onto a 2-piece of wood for 18 hours fighting the currents. He was rescued by sponge fishermen who took him to Alistown in North Bimini. In 1935, what little wood was left on the SAPONA was stripped and sold for the construction of the complete Angler Hotel in Alistown. The 12-room hotel was built by Henry and Helen Duncombe following the destruction of their first house by fire in 1934. It became notorious for its bar and late-night parties. One of the most famous guests was Ernest Hemingway, who stayed there from 1935 to 1937. During his stay, he wrote his novel To Have and Have Not. The hotel burned to the ground in 2006. Bethel eventually lost his fortune in the liquor business and opened the only hotel on the island. Bruce Stanley Bethel, once known as the King of Bimini, died penniless in 1951. Time passed, the elements and the salt took a toll of the SAPONA. During World War II, the ship was used for bombing practice by American planes. This shattered the concrete hull and tore the steel meshing. One of these military exercises ended in mystery and left a plethora of unanswered questions, and reminds one that the SAPONA sits on the corner of the notorious Bermuda Triangle. On December 5, 1945, 3 months after the end of the war in the Pacific, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, along with 13 crew members, left from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale on a flight that would take them to Hens and Chickens Shoals and a training run at the hulk of the SAPONA. This was planned as a 3-hour exercise between Florida, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda. On their return flight, the weather deteriorated and radio contact was lost. But what little transmission was received indicated that they were disoriented and some of their instruments were not working correctly. Flight 19 included 5 Grumman TBM Avengers. 2 rescue planes sent out for them also vanished, with 13 crew members. 300 boats were sent out to search the Atlantic east of Florida, but none of the 27 men or the planes have ever been found. The Navy reported that Lieutenant Taylor, as a flight leader, mistook small islands off the coast for the Florida Keys when its compass malfunctioned. The disappearance was blamed on, quote, temporary mental confusion and faulty judgment on the part of Lieutenant Taylor. A year after the report, Taylor's mother, Catherine, successfully petitioned the Navy via her attorney to amend the report of the incident to causes unknown. Catherine Taylor never accepted her son's death, believing he was stranded on an island after floating there with a life jacket. When visiting Fort Lauderdale, she would go to the docks with his photograph, asking strangers, "Have you seen this man?" She was also offering a reward of $1,000. Perhaps the Navy knew more intimate details about Taylor than his mother. Rumors were that he'd been drinking the night before the flight, and he was suffering from a hangover on the morning of December 5th. He tried to get a replacement, was unsuccessful, and showed up 25 minutes late. Another rumor was that he had a date with actress Jinx Falkenberg, or that he broke up with his girlfriend. Supposedly, he received a letter with disturbing news that he stuck in his jacket pocket, and it went with him wherever he ended up. There were prior reports of Taylor being rescued 3 times over the Pacific Ocean after getting lost and ditching his plane in water. Most of the pilots on Flight 19 were trainees. The planes they were flying were known to sink in under a minute. According to the book The Disappearance of Flight 19, Taylor was a good pilot who became careless, and his family and fellow pilots described him as a handsome loner and a lost soul. And contrary to reports that his troubles were owed to the woman in his life, he wasn't that interested in women or much else. But what happened to the rescue mission who went after Flight 19 and disappeared as well? It seems that personal problems was not the cause of their disappearance. 20 years passed and the SAPONA continued on her silent vigil over this part of the Atlantic Ocean. In 1965, she was used in the James Bond film Thunderball. Then, in 1977, for the horror flick Shockwaves. Hurricanes in 2004 broke the stern and partially submerged it. Sitting in 17 feet of transparent water, it has been taken over by sea life and is a favorite spot for divers. Fast forward to December of 2020. There's something more strange about a boat traversing the Bermuda Triangle than its disappearance. On December 28, 2020, a 29-foot blue and white Mako Cuddy cabin with 20 passengers left Bimini en route to Lake Worth, Florida. This was a 140-mile trip. Within a few days, the family of one of the passengers reported them overdue to the Bahamian authorities. They in turn notified the Coast Guard. For some reason, the only information given out was the particulars of the vessel, but nothing else. Was it smuggling drugs, illegal immigrants, or something else that could account for the lack of explanations? Neither the name of the boat, the passengers, or the reason for the trip was given. Coast Guard Petty Officer Jose Hernandez reported to a local South Florida newspaper that no signal had been received from an emergency position indicating radio beacon, which is activated either in an emergency or if it touches water. The Coast Guard searched approximately 17,000 square miles for about 84 hours before calling the search off on January 1st, 2021. No further information has ever been provided as to what happened to the vessel and those aboard as it traversed the waters of the Devil's Triangle. Interesting. But there was more mystery to that ship besides that it disappeared. It's like, why the secret? What's the name of the ship? What happened? How many people? But mum's the word. Okay. Next article is out of the U.S. Sun. It's titled Death in the Skies, How a U.S. Fighter Pilot was Killed While Chasing a UFO and His Death Was Covered Up as His Family Calls for Answers. Thomas Mantell was a 25-year-old war hero when he was killed in a plane crash after being scrambled to chase down a UFO. And almost 75 years on, his family are still desperate for answers. The official story is that he flew too high in a plane and ran out of oxygen while chasing Venus or a weather balloon. But that simply doesn't wash for his grandson Terry and the rest of the Mantell family. Wow. The government have tried to say he was a flyboy, that he was like Maverick in Top Gun. But he was just doing what he was told to do, Terry says. He had 2 sons. He was married to his high school sweetheart. He was an experienced pilot and he died chasing something he thought was a threat to America. What was it? I'm not sure. Mantell was a decorated World War II veteran who had been awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for his heroics and even served on D-Day. Yet, despite dodging death from Nazi anti-aircraft guns, the young dad died when his P-51 Mustang mysteriously fell out of sky just miles from where he was born in Franklin, Kentucky. Captain Mantell, who was flying a training mission at the time with 3 other pilots, was dispatched by Godman Army Airfield at Fort Knox after reports of an unknown object on January 7, 1948. The mysterious shape in the sky was spotted by cops and then airmen stationed in the base's control tower. Some witnesses described the shape in the sky as a 300-foot disc, while others said it was a flaming red cone trailing a gaseous green mist. The sighting came as UFO fever was gripping the United States, being 6 months after the infamous Roswell Incident and the first modern sighting by pilot Kenneth Arnold. But while those inflamed public curiosity and America's newfound obsession with flying saucers, Captain Mantell's encounter took a dark twist and a tragic end. Thomas ordered one of his wingmen from 165th Fighter Squadron to return to base and to arm his plane with hot guns to prepare to engage. The other pilots peeled off the pursuit, but war hero Mantell bravely sped on towards the UFO, and when he hit 20,000 feet, suddenly all contact was lost with Thomas. It has been reported that some of his final radio communications to the airbase tower saw him describing a metallic object of tremendous size. After his final message, there was an eerie silence before visual contact was reestablished with his plane. Shocked witnesses on the ground were horrified as they saw his Mustang spiraling back to Earth, crashing into the ground on a farm at around 3:18 p.m. Rescuers rushed to the crash scene, but Thomas was found dead. He left behind his wife Peggy, his two sons, Thomas and Terry, an enduring mystery that has become a source of pain for the family that is still passed on between the generations. And after his son Terry died last year, age 74, from COVID, his grandchildren are continuing to try and establish what happened to their grandfather. His grandson Terry said, "My dad would break down and start crying even up to when he died when he spoke about Thomas." Wow. He just always wished he got to know his dad, but he never did, and that was a source of pain for him. Terry went on, "My dad was only 2.5 when it happened, but it always affected him. I first heard about it when I was very young, and back then it was hard for me to talk to people about it because no one ever believed me. It's incredible, but at that time it's sad. It's incredible, at the same time it's sad. Thomas was not even meant to fly that day, but the other pilot was sick. It was just meant to be a practice mission. I feel a lot of pride when I think about him. He accomplished so much at such a young age. He got the Distinguished Flying Cross, and he survived World War II. And for him to then come back home and die that way was very painful, and the government has not done Thomas justice." With the 75th anniversary of Roswell approaching, well, this was already it already happened, and the conversation around UFOs becoming a national security debate in Washington, the Mantell family are calling for answers. UFOs have stepped from the realm of fringe conspiracy theories into congressional hearings and Pentagon reports, with lots of very senior officials and politicians admitting there is something in the skies. And so far no explanation has been given, with hundreds of sightings investigated by the Pentagon remaining as unexplained and potentially posing a national security risk. Military pilots and other veterans are now feeling more confident to come forward and talk about their experience. Some of these people have had to live with that for such a long time, it must be rewarding for them to come forward and share their story, Terry said. Why would they lie? These are big-time pilots. What do they stand to gain? And this contrasts with previous U.S. government investigations such as Project Blue Book, which totally dismissed reports with UFOs. Terry said that the Air Force tower controllers who witnessed Thomas's encounter with a saucer-shaped UFO were told not to speak about what they saw. They were told if they did, they would lose their pensions, and eventually the crew were dispersed across the U.S. The family have even met with one of the airmen who confirmed this story to them. For the Mantells, there is no question there was a cover-up surrounding Thomas's death, but the new push for transparency in Washington has given them hope. I like that UFOs are getting on the mainstream news and the governments are talking about it, but I do wish they would go back and tell us what happened to Thomas. Terry said they have to have something on the case. It would bring a lot of peace to the family. I am passing the story on to my daughter, and I am saying they have to go have a lot of pride because of their great-grandfather is Thomas Mantell. He wasn't some crop duster joyriding when he saw UFO. He was instructed by Fort Knox to chase this thing and check it out. He was basically the first martyr. Well, but again, I ask, after so many years, they made a point. After so many years of having very good sources, such as pilots, trained observers, come forward and say, hey, I think I saw whatever, and shutting everybody down, basically threatening them that they could lose their career, their pensions. Why now is the government wanting to be so open about it? I don't know. That's very suspicious in my book. Let's go on to the next article. It's out of Ancient Origins, and it's titled "Soul-Destroying Job of a Sin Eater was to Consume the Sins of the Deceased." The Middle Ages had its fair share of terrible jobs, from cesspit cleaners to rat catchers and even royal bottom wipers. But few were as soul-destroying as the job of a sin eater, who carried the weight of people's unconfessed sins to earn their daily bread. No one knows exactly where the concept of sin eating began, but it is generally associated with Christianity, even though it was never sanctioned by the church. It can be traced back to belief that Jesus Christ sacrificed himself to purify humanity of their sins to the Jewish tradition of manifesting sins on a goat, or the medieval custom in which nobles gave bread to the poor in exchange for their prayers for a recently deceased relative. But regardless of its origins, the practice of sin eating was most prevalent across England, Scotland, and Wales from the 17th to the 19th centuries. The God-fearing villagers of this time would discreetly hire a sin eater to absorb their loved ones' unconfessed sins. The sin eater would soak up the misdeeds of the dead by eating bread placed on the corpse's chest or face and saying, I give easement and rest now to thee, dear man, woman, or child. Come not down the lanes or in our meadows, and for thy peace I pawn my own soul. Amen. Once the bread had been eaten, it was believed that the weight and consequences of the misdeeds were passed from the deceased to the sin eater. Afterwards, they were often beaten or chased from the home with sticks by family members anxious to rid themselves of the damned and cursed sin eater, who was believed to be ravaged by the sins of the dead. The sin eater typically was destitute, alcoholic, or impoverished, and paid a high price for his work. They were despised and shunned from society for being willing to sell their soul and risk eternal damnation for just a few pence. Interesting, right? How do you get out from being in trouble? Have a sin eater show up and eat some bread off your chest. Okay, I hope you like this last little group of interesting articles, and I will be back with you soon. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on, so until then, take care.